Sweetheart, this table is for people who earned a seat.
Then we agree completely on the table's purpose.
Cute. What's your rank? Come on, everybody in this room has one.
Tonight I'm just a guest, Lieutenant.
A guest. Honored jest. That's adorable. Somebody's +1 wandered up to the big table. The +1 section is by the kitchen, ma'am. You'll love it. Great access to the food. Why is everybody standing up?
Have you ever watched a joke walk into a wall made of stars? Because in the next few minutes, 4 generals will snap to attention in front of the woman this seal just mocked. And the one signature that owns the rest of his career belongs to her. Comment where you are watching from. Drop a like. And let us rewind. Percy Warfield joined the Navy at 18. In an era when the Navy had exactly one job, it was eager to give a black man from the Alabama pine woods. And that job came with a serving tray. Steward's mate. He poured coffee on a cruiser through 2 deployments. He pressed officers' shirts, set officers' tables, stood behind officers' chairs through 1,000 dinners. Invisible on purpose. In white gloves, his wife bleached and ironed until they glowed. And twice a year, when the fleet threw its grand balls in hotels exactly like the Grandview, in ballrooms exactly like this one, Percy Warfield stood against the wall under the chandeliers, straight-backed, silent, filling glasses for men who never once learned his name. In a Navy that let him hold every job in the room except a chair. He never got bitter. That was the mystery of him. The mystery Althea spent her whole childhood studying. He made Chief Petty Officer the hard way, one of the first black chiefs in his rating. And when he finally retired, he kept the white gloves in his dresser drawer, folded like something holy. When little Althea asked him why he kept them, Percy Warfield gave the answer that built the rest of her life. Because they're going to look different on you. Baby girl. She took the long way to proving him right. Navy scholarship, officer's commission, one of a handful of black women in her year, 12 years in uniform, lieutenant commander's stripes, and a wall she hit that had nothing to do with her fitness reports. The polite, smiling, unwritten wall that 1,000 doors are made of. So she took the wall apart from the other side. Law school at night. Defense policy. 15 years becoming the sharpest weapons acquisition mind in Washington. The woman who saved the fleet, $11 billion, and 3 broken shipbuilding programs. The staffer senators requested by name, and admirals learned not to bluff. And 3 weeks ago, in a quiet ceremony the news cycle mostly missed, Althea Warfield had raised her right hand and been sworn in as the Secretary of the Navy, the civilian boss of the entire United States Navy and Marine Corps, every ship, every sailor, every Marine, every SEAL, 900,000 people, 1 signature. 2. Her official public introduction was scheduled for tonight, at the Navy Birthday Ball, where 4 Marine generals and the Chief of Naval Operations would escort her in at 8 o'clock sharp. And the fleet would meet its new secretary. But Althea had come at 6:30, alone. No aide. No announcement. In a plain Navy suit, with her father's chief's anchors riding in her clutch. Because before she was anybody's secretary, she was Percy Warfield's daughter. And she wanted 1 private hour in a chandeliered ballroom where a man in white gloves once stood against the wall. She found the spot by the kitchen doors. She stood there a long moment with her hand flat on the wallpaper. The way you touch a headstone. Look different yet. Daddy, she said quietly. Then she took her seat at the head table. At the place card that read, Honored Guest. Set there by an event staff sworn to secrecy about who the honored guest was. And she folded her hands. And she waited for her navy to arrive. It arrived in dress whites. Loud. At 7:15. Holding court 3 tables away. Lieutenant Trip Van, 29, was the kind of officer the recruiting posters dream about, and the wardroom quietly endures. 3rd-generation Navy. A senator's grandnephew. Bud, S-class anchor of every story he told. Teeth like a yacht ad. He was a real SEAL, with a real trident, and 1 real deployment. And he wore all of it the way some men wear cologne. Applied heavily. Detectable at distance. The trick to Hell Week. He was announcing to Bethany and half the room is that most guys quit from the cold. Me. The cold quit first. Coyle laughed on cue. Coyle always laughed on cue. And then Trip Van's eyes drifted across the ballroom, past the ice sculpture, and landed on the head table, where a quiet black woman in a plain civilian suit was sitting, folded-handed, at the best seat in the house. Hold my drink, he said. Delighted. Somebody's lost. He came over with his drink anyway. Because boys like Trip Van never actually hand off the drink. They just like saying it. He arrived at the head table with the rolling, proprietary walk of a man who had decided the whole evening was his wardroom, and stood over her, and gave the little cough people give to waiters. Hey there, ma'am. I think there's been a mix-up. He smiled, the yacht ad smile, tapping the tablecloth twice. This is the head table. Official party. Flag officers. Distinguished visitors. That whole situation. I know what a head table is? Lieutenant, Althea said it pleasantly. Taking in the trident. The ribbons. The single gold stripe and a half. Thank you for checking on me. Right. But he laughed a little, looked back at Coyle, who had trailed him over like a dinghy. Ma'am, this seating is for people connected to the ceremony. Are you, like, with the hotel catering coordinator, you can tell me I'm exactly where I was seated. By who? Because I know the protocol officer, and this is... He snapped his fingers softly. Twice. Prospecting for a theory. You know what? I bet you're somebody's guest. Whose guest are you? We'll get you situated at the right table. No harm done. That's kind. I'm comfortable here. He tried charm one more time, because charm had never once failed him. He swept an arm out over the ballroom, like a realtor. Ma'am, do you even know what room you're in? That's Admiral Kessler by the ice sculpture. My grandfather put his son through the academy. That table is 3 congressmen and a defense CEO whose boat I've fished off of. The gentleman with the sash is the ambassador of somewhere that matters. He turned back to her. Palms open. The picture of reason. Everybody in this room is somebody. Is my point. It's kind of the theme of the evening. It certainly is. Althea agreed. Something changed in his face then. The specific weather change that comes over entitled men when politeness stops producing obedience. The smile stayed. The eyes went flat. See, here's the thing. Ma'am, I've been to 6 of these balls. My grandfather has a destroyer grill named after his committee work. I know everybody in this room worth knowing. He leaned down, forearm on the table, into her air, and his voice got the syrup that bullies mistake for charm. And I do not know you. So let's play it my way. What's your rank tonight? I'm just a guest. Lieutenant. Everybody has a rank. Sweetheart. Even the caterers have a rank. It's called caterer. Coyle snorted behind him. So either you've got a rank, or you've got a +1 wristband, or you've got a real interesting story. And I'm dying to hear which. Around the head table, the early arriving brass-adjacent guests. A commander. A captain's wife. 2 colonel's aides. All discovered fascinating properties in their bread plates. The oldest silence in America settled over the linen. The silence of people who know exactly what they are watching and have decided it is not their table to defend. Only one person moved. An older black banquet captain named Otis. Silver-haired. Black vest. 40 years of these ballrooms in his posture. Drifted over with a water pitcher. Nobody needed, and said, gently, Sir, the lady is seated correctly. I placed the card myself. Per the protocol office. Great. Thanks. Chief. Tripp said it without looking at him. The word chief flicked sideways like ash off a cigarette. Run us another round of the Cabernet when you get a second. Otis jaw set. His eyes met Althea's for 1/2 of 1 second, and something passed between them, 60 years wide, and she gave him the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. He filled her water glass she had not touched. Said, Ma'am, with a dignity that italicized it, and withdrew to the wall by the kitchen doors, where he stood, straight-backed and silent, watching, in the exact spot where, though he could not have known it, another man in service dress had stood 60 years before him. Where were we? Tripp straightened up and plucked her place card off the china, holding it at arm's length like a lab result. Honored guest. No name. No rank. You know what that tells me? He showed it to Coyle. Tells me somebody's +1 got ambitious. Babe. Bethany had materialized. Sequins and phone. Already filming with the flash considerately off. Maybe she won a contest. Maybe she's the entertainment. Coyle offered. Okay. Fair is fair. Pop quiz. Tripp spread his hands. Magnanimous. A game show host in dress whites. You hang around my navy. You pick things up. So prove you belong. Ma'am, name 1 ship. Any ship in the fleet. Go. Althea considered him for a moment over her folded hands. The last ship I stood on was a carrier. She said mildly. I christened her. There was a beat of silence, and then Tripp and Coyle broke at the same time. Doubling. Wheezing. Hanging off each other's shoulders. She christened it Coyle could barely produce air. With what? A coupon. Ma'am? Respect. Respect. Tripp wiped an eye with his knuckle. That's the best answer I've ever heard at one of these. You christened a carrier. And I designed the trident. He flicked the gold insignia on his own chest and winked at Bethany's phone. Get all that. Babe. Every second. Bethany said sweetly. And on her screen. In a corner, she wasn't watching. A little red number had begun to climb. 300. 600. 1,000. Strangers arriving from nowhere with their terrible patience. Typing. What ballroom is this? Typing. Oh, he's cooked. Wait for it. Guys, be nice. Tripp said, in the voice people use when they mean the opposite, playing to a room he was sure was his. Ma'am, I'm going to make this real simple, and then I'm going to enjoy my evening. This seat. He tapped the back of her chair. Belongs to somebody important. Somebody with stars or stripes, or a last name that opens doors. So, last chance. And then we find your actual table. He bent down to her level, which was his fourth mistake of the night, but far from his last, and spaced it out slowly, loudly, for the phones. What is your rank? And Althea Warfield, who had been asked that question her whole life in 100 uglier costumes, who had watched her father get asked it with a coffee pot in his hand, looked up at the boy in the beautiful white uniform and answered it truthfully. I don't have one. Lieutenant. There it is. He straightened, triumphant, arms wide to the room like a lawyer resting. No rank. Freeloader confirmed. He flicked the place card. It spun across the linen and crash-landed in the flag centerpiece, crooked among the stars and stripes. Coil. Go grab one of the event staff. Let's get this seat ready for an actual somebody before the official party walks in. On it, Coil said, giggling. Not going anywhere. Sear. A junior event coordinator had been summoned by a snap of Tripp's fingers. A kid in a hotel blazer with a clipboard and a hunted expression. Sir. The lady is on the seating chart. Head table. Seat 2. It came from the protocol office directly. I really can't. Lists get padded. Junior. Happens at every one of these. Tripp patted the kid's shoulder without looking at him. Somebody's cousin does somebody a favor. Don't sweat it. We're handling it at the officer level. The kid retreated. At the wall by the kitchen doors, Otis set down his pitcher, very deliberately, and slipped out through the service exit with the unhurried speed of a man who has decided something. Under the table, Althea's hand rested on her clutch, and through the thin leather, she could feel the shape of her father's chief's anchors, the ones he earned in a navy that made him fight a decade for them. And she thought about Percy Warfield standing against a wall, exactly like that wall, in gloves that glowed, keeping his face smooth, while men laughed at tables exactly like this one. Steady. Baby girl, said his voice in her memory, the way it always did. The coffee never spills unless you let your hands argue. Her hands did not argue. Althea looked at the place card lying crooked in the flags. She looked at her water glass, and her folded hands, and the 300 people not looking at her, and the boy above her wearing the whitest uniform in the room, and she made the calculation black women have been making at beautiful tables for a very long time. The one where you weigh what a scene will cost you against what silence will. And she reached over, righted the little card with 2 fingers, and set her napkin on the table. And she began, with perfect unhurried dignity, to rise and give the boy the seat. Tripp Van was not the kind of man to let a retreat happen with dignity. Winners, his grandfather always said. Run up the score. As Althea rose, he swept her chair back for her with a butler's flourish, bowing slightly, playing it huge for the phones. Allow me. Ma'am, we'll get you situated somewhere more. Your speed, Coil. Escort the lady to the +1 section. They've got a lovely view of the coat check. It would be my honor, Coil said, offering his arm like a doorman in a comedy. Actually, hold on. Hold on. Tripp snatched a champagne flute off a passing tray and dinged it twice with his class ring. And his corner of the ballroom swiveled toward him, because he was tall and golden and loud. And rooms obey those things right up until the moment they stop. A toast. Since we're all learning about seating tonight, he raised the flute high, teeth gleaming. Toll rank. Ladies and gentlemen, earned never gifted, never borrowed, and never, ever. He tipped the glass toward Althea with a wink. Self-appointed. Scattered glasses rose in his orbit. Some sincere, most hostage. 2 junior officers at the next table laughed along the way. You laugh at a boss's joke. A young female ensign beside them did not laugh. She stood very still with her glass at half-mast, looking at the quiet woman by the chair. And something in her face said she had been the quiet woman at a table or two herself. Coyle, riding the wave, reached across and picked up Althea's untouched water glass. Here, let me clear your setting for you. Ma'am. Housekeeping. He handed the glass to a passing tray with a flourish. Then her napkin. Then her bread plate. Dismantling her place at the table piece by piece while Bethany narrated to her live stream in a game show whisper. Yo, povnie. Kati k. Kati k. Kati. Somebody's auntie wandered up to the head table at the Navy Ball and just got her whole setting repossessed. I cannot. This app is free. Bethany's stream ticked past 4,000 watchers. In the corner of her screen, the comments were now scrolling too fast to read, which was a mercy. Because they had begun to say things like, oh no, and he doesn't know, and I recognize her from the confirmation hearings. Wait. Tell you what. Let's make it official. Tripp raised 2 fingers toward the doors and snapped them at a hotel security guard drifting the perimeter. A heavy-set man who arrived reluctantly. Hat in hand. My man. This lady has no rank. No name on her card. And no business at the official table. Walk her down to general seating for me. The guard looked at Althea. At her plain navy suit, at her stillness, and his whole face apologized before his mouth moved. Ma'am, if you wouldn't mind, it's quite all right, Althea said gently, to the guard, because the guard was only the latest man in a long line handed someone else's ugliness to deliver. I was just leaving the table. She picked up her clutch, and then, because Percy Warfield had raised his daughter to leave every table better than she found it, she pushed her chair in behind her, squared it neatly against the linen, and turned to go find whatever corner of the ballroom this evening intended to give her. Althea stood beside the chair she had just been swept out of, her clutch in both hands, and looked up at the boy mid-toast, and asked him one quiet question underneath the noise. Lieutenant, before I go, that trident on your chest, who signs the commission behind it? The president. Sweetheart. He didn't even lower the glass. Close, said Althea Warfield. And the great doors at the back of the ballroom opened. The honor guard came first, rifles and flags, forming a corridor of white gloves. The band snapped off its dinner jazz mid-phrase. And through the doors, out of the marble lobby, came the official party. 4 Marine generals in evening dress, stars from their shoulders to their sleeves, walking 2 by 2 with the unhurried synchronization of men who have marched at funerals and inaugurations. Behind them, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Renner, 4 stars of his own, gold to the elbow. And at the edge of the doorway, half in shadow, stood Otis, the banquet captain, exactly where he had planted himself after slipping out the service exit 10 minutes earlier, with the hotel's protocol officer beside him wearing the face of a man reading his own obituary. As General Slater drew level, Otis did not speak. 40 years of ballrooms had taught him that the truly important messages travel without words. He simply caught the general's eye and tilted his silver head. Once, toward the head table, Slater's gaze followed. It found the empty honored guest chair, It found the woman in the plain navy suit standing beside it with her clutch in both hands. It found the boy in dress whites frozen mid-gesture between her and her own seat. And General Slater changed course by 9 degrees. And 3 generals and an admiral changed course with him. The way a formation banks. The ballroom began to stand, table by table, the way water freezes across a pond, and the standing spread outward from the doors in a wave. Conversations died in rings. The band leader lowered his baton and did not raise it. Phones came up over shoulders like periscopes, and a room that 30 seconds earlier had been 300 private evenings became, in total silence, one single audience. Finally, Tripp drained his toast and set the flute down, straightening his jacket, entirely unbothered at being upstaged. He leaned toward Bethany without taking his eyes off the procession. Doors. Babe. Now that is what somebody looks like. Slater. 4 stars. Hardest man in the Corps. Renner. Snow. My grandfather has his cell number. Get the phone up. When they pass our table, I'll introduce you. The procession did not head for the dais. It took the room a moment to notice, and Tripp a moment longer, because men like Tripp narrate the world faster than they observe it. The official party had come off the honor guard corridor and turned, all of them, in step, and they were now crossing the open parquet of the dance floor on a straight, unmistakable azimuth. Not toward the dais, not toward the admirals by the ice sculpture, toward the head table. Why are they? Tripp's narration thinned. They're coming to... Tripp. Coyle had gone from tablecloth white to something grayer. Coyle, being slightly less golden, had always been forced to observe the world slightly more accurately, and he was doing frantic arithmetic with it now. The empty honored guest chair. The woman in the plain navy suit standing calmly beside it. The 4 generals bearing down on their table like weather with medals. Tripp. The place card. Where's her place card? In the flowers. Why? Get it out of the flowers. Tripp. Why? But there was no time to answer, because the generals had arrived. They came around the head table in a wheeling line, and the nearest guests scattered back out of pure instinct. And General Slater, 61 years old, silver-haired, a face like a cliff with a career carved into it, stopped exactly 3 feet in front of the quiet woman in the plain navy suit. The other 3 formed up on his flank in a perfect rank, facing her, and Admiral Renner anchored the line. And for one long second, the 5 most powerful uniforms in that ballroom stood, looking at Althea Warfield. The room went silent, the way rooms do when they realize history is happening at someone else's table. Then General Slater's heels came together with a crack like a rifle shot, and his spine locked, and his chin lifted, and beside him, in one single motion, all 4 Marine generals of the official party snapped to attention. At her, facing her, a wall of stars, frozen at attention. In front of the woman Lieutenant Tripp Van had just publicly toasted out of her own chair, while he stood stranded between them, with an empty champagne flute in his hand, and his grin dying in stages. Like a light bulb, figuring out the power is gone. General Slater's eyes, locked forward at attention, made exactly one authorized movement. They flicked down, once, to the little white place card lying crooked in the flag's centerpiece where a boy had flicked it. Read the 2 words on it, and came back up, beside him. Admiral Renner's jaw performed a slow lateral motion that every officer who had ever served under him knew meant seek shelter. Somewhere in the crowd, a chair fell over. Nobody picked it up. Bethany's phone slid down and off her sequined knee, still streaming, and she did not reach for it. On the screen, 11,000 strangers were typing the same sentence in different fonts. He is so cooked. General Slater spoke first. At attention. In the parade voice that 4 decades had built. And it reached the chandeliers. Madam Secretary, good evening. The official party is formed and ready for your entrance. Ma'am, whenever you wish. The word went around the ballroom, the way lit gasoline goes around a garage. Secretary, Madam Secretary. 300 people passed it from table to table in a spreading hiss of silk and dress wool, and the ones who followed the news arrived at it first. And you could track the understanding moving across the room by watching hands come up over mouths. Trip Van's brain, gamely, tried one final off-ramp. Secretary, he whispered to Coyle, through teeth that had stopped working properly. Like an executive assistant, right? Like she schedules the Secretary of the Navy. Trip. Coyle's voice came out as a dry hinge. The service secretary. The civilian above the admirals. Above all of them. My dad briefed one once. He practiced in the car for 2 days. Trip. I handed her water glass to a busboy. The announcer's voice rolled out of the speakers then. Cued from the wings. Rich as a cathedral organ. And finished the arithmetic for everyone in the cheap seats. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, officers of the fleet, please welcome the Secretary of the United States Navy. The ballroom detonated to its feet. Applause crashed off the chandeliers. The band hit the ruffles and the walls of the old Grandview shook the way they had shaken for 60 years of admirals and ambassadors. And all of it, every clap and every horn note, poured down on a composed black woman in a plain navy suit standing beside a chair she had just been laughed out of. Althea Warfield let it wash for exactly 3 seconds. Then she raised one hand, and the room obeyed it into silence, which is a thing that hands can do when they belong to the person the generals stand up for. Thank you. Please, be seated. We're early yet. She turned to the wall of stars in front of her. General Slater. Gentlemen, Admiral, stand easy. We'll make our entrance on schedule. The generals snapped to ease in one motion. Nobody else in the ballroom sat down. Nobody was going to miss what came next. And everybody could feel it coming. The way pressure arrives before weather. Althea turned. Finally, to the lieutenant. He stood 4 feet away in his beautiful white uniform with an empty champagne flute still hanging from his fingers. Sweat shining at his hairline, and to his tiny credit, he did not run. She looked at him the way she had looked at broken shipyards and padded contracts. Without heat. With total precision. A woman itemizing. You asked me a question earlier. Lieutenant, in front of all these people, it deserves an answer at the same volume. Her voice was level, unhurried, and it carried to the kitchen doors. You asked my rank. Here is the truth. I don't have one. She let his half-second of hope live and die. I don't have a rank. Lieutenant, I sign them. The exhale that went through that ballroom had weight. 300 people releasing the same held breath. You told me the president signs the commission behind that trident. I said close. Here is exact. She took one step toward him, and he managed not to step back. Barely. The president appoints. The Senate confirms. And the secretary signs. Every commission in this room, every promotion list, every command slot, every board, every trident, every anchor, crosses one desk before it becomes real. She tilted her head, almost kindly, as of 3 weeks ago. Lieutenant, that desk is mine. You wanted to know if I was somebody important. I'm the somebody your paperwork prays to. Coyle sat down without meaning to. His legs simply resigned. General Slater moved then. He reached past the flowers with 2 fingers, lifted the little white place card out of the centerpiece where it had crash-landed, read it once, and set it back at the head of the table, square to the edge, with the care people give to folded flags. Then he drew back the chair, her chair, and stood behind it at a modified attention that no regulation anywhere requires. Your seat, Madam Secretary, said the hardest man in the Marine Corps. Thank you, General. Althea sat. She settled her clutch beside the bread plate that had been repossessed and would shortly return with reinforcements. Smoothed her napkin, folded her hands exactly as before, and looked up at the 2 officers in white standing wrecked in front of her table. Well, don't hover. Gentlemen, she indicated the 2 empty chairs across from her, and her voice put on, for the first time all evening, one thin blade of steel. You spent all that effort on this seating chart. Sit down. You're at my table now. Lieutenant Trip Van sat like a man lowered by crane. Somewhere behind him, an aide leaned down to Bethany, who was holding her recovered phone in both shaking hands, and said, with terrible courtesy, "Ma'am, you'll want to preserve that recording. All of it. There will be people who need to see it." And at the wall by the kitchen doors, Otis the banquet captain stood straighter than the honor guard, blinking more than the chandeliers required, in the exact spot where a man in white gloves had stood 60 years before, watching a war field finally sit down at the head of the table. Dinner was served. It was, every guest at that table would later agree, the most educational dinner in the history of the United States Navy. On one side of the linen sat the official party, 4 Marine generals and the Chief of Naval Operations, eating prime rib with the measured calm of men at a change of command. At the head sat the Secretary of the Navy, and directly across from her, in dress whites that had fit better an hour ago, sat Lieutenant Trip Van and Lieutenant Coyle, upright as fence posts, being observed. His commanding officer arrived within minutes, a weathered Navy captain with a War College ring, moving through the tables at the speed of a man walking to his own court-martial. He bent at Althea's shoulder, gray around the lips. Madam Secretary, on behalf of the command, I cannot begin to. With your permission, I'll remove these 2 officers immediately, and we will handle... Denied. Captain, but thank you. Althea sliced her prime rib without hurry. The lieutenants will stay for dinner. The view from this table is educational, and education is a Navy priority. Isn't that right? Gentlemen? Yes. Ma'am, said 2 voices. In the register, boys use outside a principal's office. She was not cruel. That was the thing every phone in the ballroom failed to capture, and every person at the table would swear to for the rest of their lives. There was no gloating in her, no desert of revenge. What there was worse. There was instruction. Between courses. She opened her clutch and set 2 small tarnished anchor insignia on the white linen, side by side, where both lieutenants could see them. My father's, she said. Chief Petty Officer Percy Warfield. He earned these in a Navy that let him hold every job in the room except a chair at the table. He served drinks under chandeliers exactly like these. In this hotel, in white gloves, for men who never once asked his name. She turned the anchors gently with 1 finger, straightening them. You asked my rank tonight. Lieutenant, because you had decided from across the room that I could not possibly have one. My father stood against walls his whole career because better men than you decided the same thing about him. You come from a long tradition. It is just not the one you think. Trip Van looked at the little anchors and at his own gold trident swimming in the candlelight. And something in his face, finally, fully broke open. Ma'am, I didn't know who you were. If I had known, that is the problem exactly. Lieutenant, she said it without raising her voice, and every officer within earshot leaned in, because they could hear the sentence being carved for the archives. Respect that has to check a nameplate first is not respect. It is caution. And an officer who is only careful with the powerful is not careful at all. He is dangerous everywhere else. Beside her, General Slater set down his fork, dabbed his mouth, and contributed the only sentence he spent on Trip Van all evening. Quiet as a safety lecture. Lieutenant, I have folded flags for men who earned that trident. Tonight you will listen more than you drink. Yes, sir. Bethany did not stay for dessert. She had attempted, somewhere during the salad course, to become liquid and drain quietly toward the lobby, and had been intercepted by a polite aide with a notepad who explained that her live stream was now part of an official record. And could she kindly confirm her contact information? She spent the rest of the evening on a lobby settee watching her own video multiply across the internet without her. The comments turned fully around. The way tides turn. Her handle pinned at the top of every repost like a name on a charge sheet. When the plates were cleared, the master of ceremonies approached the dais and the ballroom hushed for the evening's remarks. Althea rose, and the room rose with her, and she paused one moment at her chair. Then, in front of the fleet, instead of walking the direct line to the dais, the Secretary of the Navy crossed the long way, around the dance floor, to the wall, by the kitchen doors, and shook the hand of a silver-haired banquet captain named Otis. First, before any admiral, and said something to him that no microphone caught, and the old man laughed and wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist. 300 people watched her do it. That was rather the point. Some lessons you deliver in a speech. Some you deliver on foot, at the dais. Althea Warfield set down her prepared remarks, looked out at the fleet, and decided the evening had already chosen its topic. I had a speech about shipbuilding. She said, "The fleet will forgive me. Tonight, I want to talk about my father." And she told them, Percy Warfield, 18 years old, off the Alabama pine woods, handed a serving tray by the only Navy that would have him and told it was the whole of his horizon. Steward's mate, white gloves, 2 deployments, pouring coffee through gun drills. The balls in hotels exactly like this one. In ballrooms exactly like this one, where he stood against the wall under the chandeliers, invisible on purpose, refilling the glasses of men who never learned his name. My father held every job in the room, she said, except a chair. He pressed the shirts. He set the tables. He memorized the preferences of officers who looked through him for 20 years. And when I asked him, once, why he wasn't bitter, he told me, "Baby girl, bitterness is just polish for somebody else's silver." I decided a long time ago to shine my own. The ballroom had gone church quiet. He made chief the hard way, one of the first in his rating, and he kept his white gloves in a dresser drawer his whole life. I asked him why once. He said, "Because they're going to look different on you." She paused, and her composure flexed, and held. "Daddy, I want to report, 60 years late. The Navy has moved your family from the wall to the head table, and starting tonight, it is going to remember who stood on the wall." She lifted one hand toward the kitchen doors. And on Qui. Otis, the banquet captain, and two of his staff wheeled out a small round table, draped in white, and set it, with ceremony. In the open space before the dais, one chair, one place setting, a pair of white service gloves folded on the plate, a coffee cup, turned upright, ready to be filled, for once. For the man who always poured. This is the steward's table, Althea said. From tonight forward, by directive of the secretary, one stands at every ball this navy throws. For the messmen, the stewards, the mess attendant, the men who served the service when the service would not serve them. The card reads, for those who served the service. When you pass it, gentlemen, ladies, you will think of every rank in this room that got where it stands on roads. Other people were not allowed to walk. The fleet came to its feet in a single motion and stayed there. In the middle rows, scattered through the crowd, a handful of very old black men in blazers with unit pins, invited guests whose invitations suddenly made sense, stood with their hands over their hearts and their faces shining. And the applause went on so long, the band gave up waiting and joined it. The clip crossed the internet before the cake was cut. By morning, I don't have a rank. I sign yours had been captioned onto 11 million screens. And the footage of 4 Marine generals snapping to attention in front of a mocked woman in a plain Navy suit was running side by side with Bethany's own live stream, which the internet had preserved with its usual mercy, which is none. Monday came for everyone. For Lieutenant Trip Van, it came in a small office with his commanding officer, a formal counseling record, and a career quietly rerouted around him. The early command slot evaporated. The promotion track cooled. His platoon handed to a man with better judgment and worse teeth. The teams handled the rest their own way, which is to say, without a single word. Lockers falling silent when he entered, seats filling before he reached them. There was a strong institutional push from 3 separate directions to simply end him. The block came from the one desk nobody expected. Separation teaches him nothing. The secretary wrote across the recommendation, in blue ink, in a firm hand. Assignment teaches. Send him to me. The orders were cut that week. Temporary additional duty. 6 months. Naval History and Heritage Command. Special Project. The Steward's Legacy Initiative. Task. Locate every living veteran of the steward and mess attendant ratings. Record their histories. Build the exhibit. At the bottom of the orders, in the signature block that makes any set of orders real, sat the lesson. Printed in plain type. Reviewed and signed. A. Warfield, Secretary of the Navy. He had asked her rank as a joke. Now her rank followed him onto every page of his working life. The project remade him the way real history remakes anyone it gets its hands on. 11 old men were still living. Trip Van drove to 9 of them himself, in nursing homes and back porches across 4 states, with a recorder and a notebook, and, at the beginning, a script. By the 3rd interview, he had stopped using the script. By the 5th, a 90-year-old former steward's mate in Georgia held up a shaking photograph of a young man in white gloves and said, "That one there. That's Warfield. Finest man on the ship. You know his little girl runs the whole Navy now. And Lieutenant Trip Van, decorated SEAL, sat in a nursing home day room and cried in front of a stranger for the first time in his adult life. Coyle took his formal counseling. then volunteered for the project unasked, which is the most honest apology men like Coyle ever learned to make. Bethany did not survive the season. The engagement dissolved by text message. The ring went back by courier. And neither of them fought for any of it, which told the whole story of what it had been. The exhibit opened in the spring at the Navy Museum, and the front row of the opening ceremony was reserved, by name, for 11 old men in blazers and unit pins, wheeled and walked and escorted to their seats by an honor guard in dress whites. General Slater flew in for it. So did Admiral Renner. And when the ribbon was cut, it was not cut by the secretary. She handed the scissors to the 90-year-old from Georgia and stood behind his wheelchair with her hands on the grips and let the flashbulbs figure out where the story was. The title wall stood behind them in raised steel letters that Althea Warfield had chosen herself. Every rank but a seat. Inside the first case, donated by the Secretary of the Navy, folded on dark velvet under a single warm light, lay a pair of white service gloves, bleached and ironed until they glowed. The placard bore a chief's anchors and a name, Percy Warfield. And beneath it, in very small letters at the bottom corner, where you had to bend to read it, the credit line the researcher had requested, compiled in his honor, by a lieutenant who needed to learn it. 1 year later, the chandeliers of the Grandview came on for the Navy's birthday again. And just inside the great doors, where every guest had to pass it, stood a small round table draped in white. 1 chair, 1 place setting, white gloves folded on the plate, 1 coffee cup turned upright. Waiting. There is one at every ball now. Every base. Every fleet. Every embassy dinner the Navy throws. 2 Allied navies wrote to ask for the pattern. The card never changes. For those who served the service, Otis came this year as a guest. The Secretary's office sent the invitation in October. Heavy cardstock. His name in calligraphy. And the old banquet captain, 40 years on the wall of that ballroom, sat at the head table in a tuxedo his daughters bought him. Utterly unable to stop straightening silverware he no longer had any responsibility for. When a young server filled his coffee cup, Otis looked at it for a long moment. And the young server, who knew exactly who he was, said, "I've got the wall tonight. Sir, you've got the chair. Somewhere." 60 years of ballrooms sighed and shifted over. Lieutenant Trip Van was there too. Back in the teams. No early command. No fast track. Working his way on the slow, honest road. And by every account, a different animal entirely. Quieter, watchful. The first man in any room to learn the names of the people carrying trays. He had assigned himself a duty this year that nobody ordered and nobody could have. He stood at the doors in his dress, whites, and escorted the old stewards to their seats, one at a time, offering his arm, learning their ships, and the fleet watched him do it and understood that some sentences really do get served in full. Before dinner, he approached the head table and asked the Secretary of the Navy for permission to give the first toast. The ballroom held its breath out of pure institutional memory. Permission granted. Lieutenant, he raised his glass, and his hand was steady, and he kept it to 6 words. To the ones who poured, everything, to the ones who poured, said 300 voices, and 4 Marine generals drank standing up. At the head table, the Secretary's new aide, a sharp-eyed young ensign who 1 year earlier had been the only officer at a certain table who did not laugh, leaned over and murmured that the schedule had them entering in 5 minutes. Althea nodded. But first, as she does every year, she slipped away from her security detail for one private moment and walked the long way around the dance floor, to the wall by the kitchen doors, and stood in a particular spot that no plaque marks, with her hand flat against the wallpaper. From that spot, if you stand where a man in white gloves once stood, you can see the whole glittering room, the chandeliers, the flags, the steward's table with its upturned cup, and the head table dead center, where a small white place card sat waiting in the candlelight, bearing neither honored guest nor any rank at all. Because the protocol office had finally gotten the line exactly right. Secretary of the Navy, Warfield. They looked different. "Daddy," she said quietly, "to the wall, to the spot, to the 60 years. You were right. They look like everything." Then she squared her shoulders the way he taught her, and went to walk into the ballroom that used to keep her family against the wall, on the arm of 4 generals who stand when she enters. "So tell me something. Because I read every single comment. Who poured for you? So you could one day sit down? Say their name. Comment it with where you are watching from. Share this with somebody who works the rooms nobody claps for. And subscribe. Because stories where the quiet ones finally get the chair are exactly what I bring here every single week."
Real talk before you go. The 4 generals didn't break me. The cup did, turned upright at an empty table, waiting to be filled for the man who poured for 60 years and never once got poured for. And her line, "Respect that checks the nameplate first is not respect, it's caution," needs to be carved over every door in every building. She didn't destroy that boy either. She assigned him, made her signature the roof over his whole career. That's scarier than firing him, and holier too. Drop a like if I don't have a rank. I sign yours, gave you chills, because I'm still not recovered.